David, thank you so much for joining me at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday. Is today Wednesday? Yep, I know what day it is. My eye is swollen and I know what day it is. Today we have our casual and recurring guest, David Kane, our fellow Tweener head tennis insider into the WTA. And today we are going to be covering Roland Garros, grass courts, and a little bit of everything too, because I think eventually this conversation is going to revolve around Serena Williams by the time we finish this entire video. Not even entirely. It's going to be the last 5 minutes because of her doubles return with Ons Jabeur, because for some reason, that's the only warm-up tournament she wants to play. So, David, where do you want to start? Do we start from Roland Garros and then just move on to grass immediately?
Yeah, we can wrap up Roland Garros. It's been a while.
We're not going to go too far back because the last time we went too far back, we had no idea what we were talking about for the first 20 minutes of our conversation.
Things move very quickly on the WTA tour. I mean, the top 10 is it's been a minute.
The top 10 alone, if we just take a quick look right now before we get into it by the end of it, top 10 starting from 1, Swiatek, Jabeur, Kontaveit, Badoza, Sakkari, Sabalenka, Pliskova, Collins, Pegula, and Muguruza.
All of whom are about to lose mild to significant amounts of points from the 2021 Wimbledon, which they're not able to defend because of the ban on Russian and Belarusian players.
They're not going to lose any points, are they? They're just not going to give them.
Everyone is losing their 2021 points equally. So that's bad news for Sabalenka and worse news for Pliskova, who made the semis and finals respectively. They stand to lose the most points, but everybody's losing points.
So it's official that they're going to just drop out. Pliskova especially is going to drop out of the top 10 immediately.
Yes.
Muguruza is dropping out, correct or no?
I think it's possible that she may be okay.
I don't know how, because I looked at her. She lost today to Georgie in straights after being 5-2 up in the first. Don't ask me how that happened. The last time she won 2 matches in a row was Doha.
Remember when Garbiñe Muguruza won the WTA finals and finished the season ranked number 3? Me either.
Do you remember when she won multiple Grand Slams? I really couldn't tell you if she was the top 10 player. No offense to Garbiñe, but it's been that kind of year. Like, she's still in the top 10, and I personally don't know how.
I mean, she's in some ways, it's pretty much all to do with the results from the end of last year, specifically that run in Guadalajara. I mean, she made it through. You think about this time last year, or even a little bit earlier than last year. She started the season and was really the player to watch, was so dominant through the Middle East swing, gets injured in Charleston, and for the most part hasn't really looked the same, barring that sort of, cosmic run in Guadalajara where things kind of just fell into place. I mean, she was down in that second round robin match to Barbara Krejcikova, who had just beaten her at the US Open. She seemed like she was going to lose in that round robin, and she somehow gets that win over Krejcikova, beats Kontaveit and beats Badoza, beats Kontaveit again. And all of a sudden she's the WTA finals champion with not a ton to show for it, and so in that way, the fact that she started the season the way that she has is in some ways not surprising. I think people really just, they want to believe in what Muguruza brings to the table because she's such a phenomenal looking athlete. She's such a clean hitter off both sides. And yet between the ears, it's just not been ideal.
What do you think it is?
Her whole career. I mean, I think part of it is I go back to a story about how Muguruza grew up on clay and was a very defensive player and had to kind of become a more offensive player. And I think I think it is much easier to be a big hitter who learns defense than a defensive player who learns offense. And I think that's sort of the reason why we get some really sloppy matches from Muguruza, is because she does not instinctively know when to pull the trigger. And I think that's why you get that sort of consternation from her on big points. She goes for a shot, she misses it because she doesn't really quite instinctively know when it's right to go for the winner. And so that's a problem, and I think as much as she sort of found this sort of ideal situation with Conchita as her coach, there's still that sort of stuff going on. And I think there's always, stuff behind the scenes. I think there was that push to sort of make her that next Maria Sharapova. I don't know if you can just make yourself the next Sharapova as much as,
I don't think you can, especially like when I think about Garbiñe Muguruza, it for me, the fact that she won Roland Garros, that was the start, I think, of it all. Correct. And correct me if I'm wrong or if I have a bad take here, but from the French,
she
go ahead.
I was going to say, well, she beat Serena in 2014 at the French. She made her first slam final at Wimbledon the previous year, and then broke through at the French the year after that in 2016, and was looking to be. And then the year later, she was number one. She won Wimbledon, beat Venus convincingly in the final, and was the world number one that summer. You know, certainly had kind of ticked off all the boxes. I mean, she will be a Hall of Fame player, in my opinion.
It's
She's
guaranteed.
done everything to achieve that, but at the same time, it's just been a very uneven career from her in many respects.
And in that kind of aspect, she's become the new Angelique Kerber, where you have, I think in that series of, if you just look on paper, you have an unbelievable run like Kerber did. What year was that? That was also 2016, wasn't it?
Her peak year of stringing together big results was 2016.
2016. Yes. It's kind of like Muguruza did that, but then we're seeing the tail end of it where she's not having the same results and she's not playing the same from a mental standpoint as of late.
It's an interesting comparison because they have had flashes. I think
exactly.
And in some ways, I guess I expect less of Kerber, just technically speaking, and yet she is so overachieved in my opinion, whereas Muguruza has continued to in many ways underachieve. I mean, if you
that's what I mean.
Those two players, you would have expected a lot. You would have expected Kerber's career of Muguruza easily, and I think Kerber's had the much more impressive career if you're to compare the two, for sure.
For the amount that she could have achieved, I think you nailed it on the head with the overachieve. She did better with the opportunities and taking advantage of the timeline too. If you think about that, like Muguruza had good wins against Serena and Venus in dominating that kind of aspect, but then Kerber just took advantage of it and won. They've won the same amount of slams, correct? 3?
Kerber's won 3, Muguruza's won 2.
Exactly.
Kerber's one slam. Kerber's a French Open away from the career slam. And when she came into Paris this year, I kind of thought it would be interesting / hilarious.
There was no way.
Possible
there was no way. I mean, after watching her play, who was it? Goff earlier this year. Just who did she play that got absolutely tormented?
I mean, she's had a rough start to the year, but she did win that title right before Paris and was, I think, ended up making the third round. Didn't end up really coming to anything.
That's what I mean.
Based on the way the French Open shook out, I mean, she certainly had as good a chance of anybody of pulling out at least a runner-up finish. I mean, in the wake of the Iga Swiatek hurricane that
of course,
in the middle of.
Like, if I'm just looking at the round of 32 because I think that's where everything starts to kind of be pieced together. Martina Trevisan, I think the biggest surprise out of everyone for Roland Garros, to be honest. I think her. How did Begu get that far? I'm trying to think of, like, out of all these players, you sent me a quote about Teichmann, about how can I explain how this person got this far. You just went, I have no idea. She makes the round of 32 and then loses first round of a 250.
Begu made it out of the Karolina Pliskova section of the draw.
Pliskova
lost to Léolia Jean-Jean, the wild card in the second round. And
that was a fun match to watch.
And Begu had a pretty wacky French Open. I mean, or at least Alexandra wanted to get her defaulted from that from her match. When she threw the racket, it bounced into the crowd.
Do you think she should have been?
We've seen so many more egregious examples of racket abuse. I mean, it's hard to, and the rules are written so broadly and interpreted liberally that it
depends on the umpire too.
It really does feel like it feels like a gut reaction. Every time a player has been defaulted, I felt like fair. And every time the player hasn't been defaulted, I've thought fair. So you do feel like you kind of have a sense of what, like when Djokovic got defaulted, you knew he was going to get to, like, that was clear cut. So
there was a moment where we thought he wasn't, but because of how it hit the umpire, it was an automatic.
It's kind of like in anger, it has to kind of almost be on the fly, whatever it is, whether it's the racket or the ball, and it needs to kind of make contacts with another person and cause an evident injury. I mean, I think once it bounces up and over, you kind of lose that momentum.
You lose the momentum, and it's just more of a surprise at that point. It's not directed towards anyone. I mean, I think the biggest surprise, if I look at all the players that made the quarters, Martina Trevisan. What can you tell me about her?
What can I tell you?
What can you? What's the ability that,
what can't I tell you about Martina Trevisan? I mean,
Please.
She is someone who was a quarterfinalist at the pandemic French Open in 2020, has a really heartwarming story, having conquered an eating disorder earlier in her career. I think that's something that, a lot of athletes can relate to. I mean, having a lot of, adolescent strife and that manifesting in an eating disorder, gets that win over Coco Gauff in 2020, makes the French Open quarterfinals, did not really have a great year in 2021 and didn't really have a great start to 2022, but starts to string it together, wins a title, gets a win over Garbiñe Muguruza right before
who
the French
hasn't
Open.
had a win over Garbiñe Muguruza.
It was a good one. It was a pretty good one.
It was a good one.
And she gets Leylah Fernandez in the quarterfinals. And heading into the quarters, I was thinking this was going to be a huge opportunity for Leylah to make another Grand Slam final. She was just in that mode. She was getting these gutsy wins over Belinda Bencic, Amanda Anisimova, who was my previous pick to make the French Open final. So I was really going just batting 1,000 on potential French Open finalists here this week. But she plays Trevisan and gets injured. Either she comes in with an injury, she aggravates an injury.
I think she aggravated it because she stopped midway through.
Her father certainly seemed to know that there was something wrong and really wanted to get her to stop, and she didn't listen. It sort of seems like, one of the situations where you kind of have made a monster where, he's so competitive and so intense, and she's just as competitive and intense. And she certainly probably saw Trevisan across the net and thought, this is an opportunity, maybe even injured, I can win this match. It kind of goes back to even Bianca Andreescu in Shenzhen a few years ago when she was had snapped her knee and still thought she could beat Karolina Pliskova on one leg. I mean, sometimes when depending on who you have across the net, you just think, I've got this, even though I'm not at 100%. So Trevisan has a choky second set, manages to pull it together and wins the third, and had not an unbelievable shot of making the final, having that rematch against Coco Gauff, who she beat in Paris just 2 years ago. I mean, it was sort of an interesting match, but it was really a testament to Coco's improvements and sort of improved technical ability that she was able to wrap up that match as well as she did, and probably played as well as you could have expected against Iga in the final, just given the disparate level of right now compared to Iga to the rest of the field. So certainly, and it's funny. I mean, just to pivot right into Coco. I mean, it was this was probably the first major tournament since Coco has been on the map that people were not really paying attention to Coco. And so it's sort of ironic that this is the one where she makes the final, and it's sort of, so much of it was draw impacted. I think we've sort of found that there is a ceiling right now with Coco, technically speaking, particularly off the forehand side. She is quite limited. I mean, she's a phenomenal athlete with a phenomenal mind and a really phenomenal backhand, but that forehand is really continuing to hold her back, and it certainly held her back against Iga in the final. I mean, she couldn't find it for the first set, and sort of only started to get it a little bit together in the second set, and still was just a chasm between her and the world number one. So it's hard to really handicap where Coco goes from here. I mean, certainly she's got as good a shot as anyone because of her strengths. Her strengths are so impressive that you think that how will this impact her? And I think the one positive thing is I think Coco has a good enough head on her shoulders that she knows that she didn't really necessarily play out of her mind to make this Grand Slam final. She didn't destroy a bunch of top 10 players to make this final. She knows that things worked out for her and she took advantage, and she could certainly be proud of that. But I think looking into Wimbledon, it's hard to anticipate how she takes this momentum onto grass.
Well, it's funny that you say that she didn't really have a dominating run to the final. She didn't drop a set. Even though she was pushed to 7-5, 7-6, I think 2 or 3 times, she didn't drop a set the entire tournament.
She didn't. I mean, her most impressive win, I would say, would be over Sloane in the quarterfinals. That was another one that I thought that Sloane
really not even Mertens. She bageled Mertens in the second.
I mean, that's sort of classic Elise Mertens, just sort of underperforming in the third and fourth round of a slam. I mean,
you have to give her some credit.
I think Coco is one of the best athletes and one of the best competitors that we have right now. I mean, I think certainly Garbiñe Muguruza could stand to borrow some of Coco's self-belief. But I think that given the draw that she had an ideal draw to make this final. This is not a world-beating run from her, and it's impressive that she did it as dominantly as she did. And I think that speaks to her technical improvements. But I still think there's a miles to go before she can really be genuinely considered an out and out threat to make regular Grand Slam semis and finals.
It's interesting because I think for her, and I just from a technical standpoint for golf too, if you watch her backhand on her backhand return, it just shows you how aggressive and extreme she is, because she already has her backhand like facing forward. So the only really way she can really turn is just by turning out. And that's why her backhand's so good, because it's so compact and flat. But then you go to her forehand, and her forehand doesn't have the same power that we thought she would have by now, especially when we saw her serve at 16 and it was going 120. So the development there isn't as fast as we would anticipate it to be. Correct?
No, I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised to see improvements of any kind, because I think a lot of times players, most players tend to be fully formed by the time you see them on tour. And certainly we've gotten to see Coco earlier than a lot of players. Most players are not playing major tournaments at 15,
more
16.
attention too, from that matter as well.
Yeah, but I think that, and in that sense, you would almost expect there to be a bit of a preservation and not much experimenting, because you want to kind of maintain the product that you've got in front of you. So I think the fact that we've started to see some improvements on the forehand is heartening, because it makes you think that they know that it's a problem and they're trying to fix it. But it also is a knock sort of against the continued knock against the Patrick Mouratoglou technique. I mean, the fact that he's teaching that forehand to these players is not great. Really not great.
How Mouratoglou's hit a forehand? Have you seen a video of him? He posted one today of him hitting a forehand. It's atrocious.
No, I've never seen him, but
I saw Linda looks good. His forehand's shit. No offense, Patrick.
I mean, it's my big takeaway from the Sunshine Swing, watching Linda Fervitova hit a forehand and realizing that this is standard academy technique that's being imparted on these players. And you think, oh God, give me the days of
thank God her dad's still coaching her.
Nick Bollettieri, oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking. This is so embarrassing that I'm blanking on his name. Robert Lansdorf. Oh God. Give me the days of Robert Lansdorf, that just sort of clean, flat, pristine technique that, Davenport, Meskina, Sharapova. I mean,
even Piatti too. He's been teaching some people out of his academy, and it's not even just Sinner anymore, even though Sinner just switched. You can see the technique that actually looks good and adaptable to the situation rather than just head on.
Yeah, I think it's a rough one. So you hope that there are continued shifts that are made, and you wonder where golf goes if Simona Halep continues to be Mouratoglou's first priority, how the golf family responds to that.
So now, since you brought that up, and we're going to go on a side tangent here, the fact that people are crying for Serena and Simona to play first round of Wimbledon with the wild card, how likely do you think that's going to happen?
I mean, we've seen some we saw Nicholas Mahut, John Isner 2 years in a row at Wimbledon. So, I mean, anything is possible.
I think they're going to do it on purpose. I don't think it's a draw. We've seen how draws are made, at least you and I. There's actually a good, if I was a betting man, I would definitely bet that they were going to meet first round. There's a good, at least 10% chance that it's going to happen.
Just feels like sometimes these players, there's a magnetism where they just sort of end up certainly close to each other in the draw, if not right on top of each other. It would certainly be a fascinating first round for both of them.
Well, can you imagine if Patrick shows up and he's just sitting in Simona's box? I just don't think it's going to go well, to be honest. And then if Serena beats her first round, I would be laughing hysterically.
I mean, in some ways, based on the way that Simona's been playing, I think maybe you'd almost want Serena in the first round, because I think Serena is, for as phenomenal as she is and mentally tough as she is also very human and very emotional. And to see your coach of a million years, in your opponent's box in a rematch of the Grand Slam final where you really got destroyed by Simona. Yes. I mean, I don't know if that's
I completely
the ideal
forgot about that too.
Start first. I mean, you go back to, those highlights from Simona, she played out of her mind.
Absolutely.
I mean, talk about Darren Cahill being back on the road with Yonex Sinner. I mean, if she can get that.
I saw that. What is that? Is he officially on his coaching staff now?
I've heard whispers, and we certainly reported it at tennis.com. I don't know if it's official in terms of
I saw him in his box today, but he lost to Tommy Paul.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a consulting situation. I don't know if it's full time, but he's present, which
he's
is
trying men's tennis now. Shocking.
Than he was a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, but at the same time, Simona seems very much entrenched in the
More
the Moratoglu
Toglu.
apparatus. So it seems like she's there.
Sphere.
She'll be there for a while in terms of who's running her social, who's managing her. She's totally
She's already,
in that.
I told
that
you she was going to be in one of his instruction videos, and she already has.
Yeah.
I told you.
I mean, that's sort of, you could see her being an academy coach, quite frankly, in a couple of years. It just seems like that's the pivot that that we're heading for.
Oh my gosh. All right, moving on to grass. The Libema Open. A Russian and a Belarusian make the final. The Russian wins, and none of them are going to play Wimbledon. It's
that's a thing that happened. I mean, it's
because even by your reaction, I just feel like it doesn't matter. If they're not going to play Wimbledon, it doesn't matter. Is that a bad thing to say?
I mean, I was talking about this on another podcast that I feel like when we talk about this Wimbledon, whether there will be an asterisk on who wins is very much going to be determinant on sort of how the tournament shakes out. If we end up with a really weird second week with some really surprising semifinalists, a surprise champion, I think that's when you'll chalk it up to, well, it was a weird year. There were no Russians or Belarusians. There were no points on offer. It was just a strange year. But I think if like Djokovic or Nadal win Wimbledon, if Iga or someone in the top 10 of the WTA or someone
on Shabor wins,
somewhat logical wins Wimbledon, you'll feel like, well, you know, you can't really say that they wouldn't have won if Sabalenka was in the draw. I mean, as great as she is, and she did make the semifinals last year, she's still not one of those players who is, you know,
going to impact.
You're not
the draw
stopping
that
someone
much.
who's on a massive win streak, a la an Iga Swiatek. I mean, if Swiatek were to not play and someone wins, you'll think, wow,
that's going to be
that
weird.
Really changed the color of this draw. But
well,
I mean, yeah.
Well, I'm just looking at from a who else made it far. Belinda Bencic, I think, is actually playing pretty well. She rolled her ankle against Jabeur in the final of, what was it? Is that Mallorca? No, it was Berlin. They played in Berlin.
Yeah.
And I thought Bencic is actually playing pretty decently on grass, and she's going to be a high seed. Whether or not her ankle's going to hold up for the tournament, I don't know. But seeing Bencic play well is actually something that you can get on board with, because if she wins, it's going to be the headline of it's about time for her, right? That's her breakthrough. But if she loses in an open draw with maybe low seeds and non-seeded players and her best opportunity, and she loses maybe in the quarters, it's going to turn into something very, very different quickly.
It does feel like a make or break tournament for Bencic in terms of making that final push at a Grand Slam tournament. It is crazy to think she has never been past the fourth round at Wimbledon, given how much of a factor she has regularly been at these grass court warm-up tournaments. You know, a few titles, a few runner-up finishes. This is a big moment for Bencic because she has traditionally been a great grass court player. You know, if she's feeling healthy, you know, there's no one other than Swiatek who you're going to say is a definite lock to make it deep at this tournament. And so if she doesn't come out of this at least with a semifinal, a final, you're going to feel like this was a big opportunity missed. And then you wonder how she regroups heading into the rest of the year.
I think who tweeted out, I think it was John Wertheim that tweeted out the top 10. If you were to guess, what would be the top 5 seeds at this year's Wimbledon on the women's side? What would be their combined record at Wimbledon? If you were to guess, because I really don't know, because it's
Swiatek, I mean, just going back to last
Kontaveit,
year,
Badoza, and Sakari. If you count up the amount of times they played Wimbledon and the amount of wins they have, I don't think it comes close to I don't even think it would come close to anyone on the men's side.
No, and I don't think that. I think if you took the top 10 seeds, I don't think they combined. I don't think their wins would match even of a Serena Williams. I mean, you look back at last year, most of the top seeds had their best Wimbledon result just last year. And it was, you know, whether it was Swiatek making the fourth round, Jabeur making the quarters, Badosa making the fourth round. I think Kontaveit, I think, made the third round. I mean, these are not, you know, last year was all about Ash Barty. I mean, it was just a very different field in that respect. But in some ways the same field, in some ways a different field. But we actually had a really good Final Four last year. We had Barty, Kerber, Pliskova, Sabalenka. It was just a really impressive, where you felt like anyone who won that tournament was going to be an impressive slam champion. It was coming off of the French Open where you had Krejcikova and Sakari and Pavlyuchenkova and Zidansek, and you just felt like, ouch, where are we right now in the women's sphere? So and we're coming off of sort of a slightly similar feel in Paris, maybe not as apoplectic as we were last year in Paris.
I don't think it's going to be like Paris, because we had Swiatek, who looks like she's not going to lose for a very long time. And we've said that, and you've used apoplectic on this channel before. So I applaud you for staying consistent with your grammar. But the top 5 seeds, I believe, for the men is going to be Novak, Rafa, Ruud, Tsitsipas, and Alcaraz. Like, just the top 2 alone has a better record than probably the top 20 in the women. I know that's like a horrible comparison, but in terms of experience,
it's as wide of a gap as you'll ever get.
Exactly.
I would imagine, compared to experience, because it's a fairly untested top 10. I mean, combined, we have Raducanu, the top 10 seeds with Raducanu with 1 slam, Muguruza with 2, Pegula, Collins, Pliskova, Sakari, Badosa, Jabeur, Kontaveit with 0, and Swiatek with 2. Right?
So 5 slams.
So that's
five slams in the top 10, and then we have
Well, 40 plus.
we're not gonna go there, because that's just too much to compare for. But you still have Berrettini, who won the Boss Open, coming back from an injury, who actually looks like he could be a contender at this year's Wimbledon again after being a finalist. Like,
Wimbledon could still be wonky for the men, because your lower 2 favorites outside of Nadal and Djokovic are Berrettini and Hurkacz, and they're top 8 seeds, and they're in the 5 to 8 range. They could both get Djokovic and Nadal in the quarterfinals, and then that frees up quite a few. That frees up 2 semifinal slots for some surprises, where I don't necessarily expect Ruud and Tsitsipas to fill them. So you kind of wonder who's going to take advantage of those openings. But knowing the way men's tennis tends to work out, you kind of feel like you'll probably get the dream slate of Nadal, Hurkacz, Djokovic, and Berrettini sort of all competing for the final. And it's hard to look at this slate. Certainly if your number 2 seed is Anett Kontaveit, who's still kind of dealing with the long-term effects of COVID, Ons Jabeur, who is amazing,
playing really well,
is sort of doing her at her absolute best, most on brand on Jabeur right now, playing a glorified exhibition, let's be honest, with Serena Williams and women's doubles.
For sure.
And you wonder, and that's sort of something I tweeted earlier. I think, who has the opportunity, like, what is the big contribution that Jabeur can give to this game is sort of really revolutionizing exhibitions, because you look over the last several decades of sort of exhibition tournaments, exhibition matches. Jabeur is going to be a player, if she maintains this level of popularity and consistency, that people are going to pay money to see play just for fun, because she'll get to do all her trick shots. She'll get to do everything. She'll really be able to put on a show.
And she has the support for it too in her home country, that people makes her a superstar. It starts from your home ground, and then you branch off. And I think it's already done it.
She's going to make a lot of money as an exhibition player. And I just don't know still if that translates to Grand Slam success, because she came into Paris with a lot of pressure and it didn't work out. And I think that's sort of the problem when you have that much variety. And I think it's sort of been the issue a little bit for Bianca Andreescu as well. When, it's great to have variety, but I think if you don't have reliable patterns to fall back on in pressure situations, you kind of end up lost in these matches. And then you end up losing to a Magdalena in the first round of a Grand Slam. And I wonder what happens to Jabeur here. I think that what benefits her on grass is that she can, the surface allows her to get on some hot streaks a bit quicker and faster. And that can maybe make up for the lack of reliability.
It's tailored to her game of the short ball and having a slice that is effective and stays low. And speaking of Andreescu, I remember Steven from The Slice actually posted this. He interviewed Andreescu for the second time in like 2 months. He talked to her and asked her, do you remember that you won a Grand Slam? Because it's like, she's like, yeah, that's weird, because you don't really comprehend that even when you're going through a slump, I still won one of the greatest tennis tournaments of all time. Like, and that kind of effect really sits with you in the idea of where their mentality is right now, you know?
I would imagine that Andreescu considers herself someone who's capable of winning a Grand Slam. I think she's someone has a good amount of self-belief and has that sort of, I don't want to say arrogance, but that's just sort of confidence in oneself. I mean, I think like even like an Alyona Ostapenko, I think will always consider herself a Grand Slam champion with that opportunity to be the best in the world. I think it's sort of the opposite of maybe a Coco Gauff, who is so, I think, much more grounded and real in terms of what her current capabilities are and what she did to get to where she is. And I think
what she can do.
Yeah. And I think in that ways that can maybe almost hold her back. Whereas, you know, maybe in a pinch, you know, that sort of delusional sense of self-belief can pull through an Andreescu or an Ostapenko in tight moments. But but I would imagine that Andreescu probably feels she's got to, I mean, looking at this field, I mean, there's no one that there's no one she really can't beat. Maybe Swiatek right now, but other than that, she's got to feel like this is as good an opportunity as anybody.
It's kind of like the same situation with Bencic. It's like, it's that same feeling of, I can beat anyone here because I have. So
I wouldn't say it's his make or break, because
no, it's definitely not
a better grass court player, and she's not won a slam yet. But I think for Andreescu, I think you look at the draw and you look at even the seeds in front of you and you think,
I can do this.
Beat these girls. And if she doesn't, she shouldn't be playing, quite frankly. I think that's where we are right now. I mean, like that's with the way the field is, you have to believe you could beat this. You could beat these. Players.
Oh, especially
beat these players.
100%. And especially what? I'm sorry, you cut out.
Especially if you're Andreescu.
That's true.
And not just anybody can believe they could beat this field, but certainly if you're Bianca, then yes.
Well, when you have that kind of confidence, it really doesn't come down to much because she already has the mentality for it. And on this grass court season, we've seen another new-ish. She's been around for a bit. I believe we're the same age. She's lefty from Brazil, Beatriz Hadid Maia, currently on a 12-match winning streak on grass. The only other Brazilian to win a grass court tournament since Maria Bueno in the 50s?
The 50s, yeah.
The 50s. So talk to us a little bit about her, because this is the WTA has been pushing her winning streak on for a while, and today she won her 12th because she's won 2 straight grass court titles, and she's even beaten Simona Halep on the way. So it actually looks like, could you consider her a favorite for Wimbledon or a dark horse? You can say no.
I mean, my reaction to her winning all these matches just feels like good for her. Like, I don't know. It's hard to translate this kind of success onto a big stage. I mean, obviously this is something that where you're really serving notice. And yes, this is probably the first major tournament where she could be considered a dark horse to make a deep run, but she's still got to do it. And she hasn't done it yet. So I think it's hard for me to feel like she's definitively in the mix until she's in the mix. And that's, and then in some ways that's unfair, because she certainly warranted being in the conversation, but at the same time, Grand Slam pressure is different than, Bad Homburg pressure. So I think that's sort of what's missing still, is sort of like these signature results. I mean, she's cleaning up what I would consider to be a fairly quiet portion of the season. I mean, the most exciting thing to happen since Roland Garros is the doubles matches of Ons Jabeur and Serena Williams. I think that speaks not only to Serena's star power, but sort of the lack of headline worthy developments sort of happening in the grass court warmups. I mean, it just hasn't really been huge. Wow, she's going to win Wimbledon. I mean, that's not the case.
It hasn't been a narrative, because during these match winning streaks, she won against Sakari, which is a good win for her, especially in a 3-setter. She beat Kvitova, but I don't know how much that holds weight now anymore. Magdala Frech, Camila Giorgi, Simona Halep, Zhang Shui. She won that in a default. I didn't even know she won that in a default. Then beat Kaya Kanepi after Kanepi beat her on clay at the French, and then just beat Jody Burrage quite easily. I have to say too. That's sad to see, because Jody's actually a really good player. But it's just funny to me how some of these players can pull together 2 weeks worth of wins and basically beat their all-time career high, because now she's top 30 in the world for singles and top 30 in the world for doubles.
I mean, again, yeah, I mean, it speaks to her having sort of an unorthodox game, being lefty, having some different spins. She's on a surface, which again, as we just said with Ons Jabeur, sort of lends itself to streaks and sort of that alchemy. And then just sort of the weirdness of the current WTA landscape where there aren't this coterie of top players reliably winning these tournaments. It does create an opening for Haddad Maia. It's to really string together quite a few matches. The question is, again, can she do it at Wimbledon? And if she does, then by all means, I think she's then earned herself about 52 weeks of goodwill, because this isn't totally out of nowhere. I mean, she had some really good results last fall. She had a really good one, I believe, against Karolina Pliskova at Indian Wells in the fall postponed BNP Paribas Open. But again, we're going quite far back for me. So that might just totally made that up.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because she plays Serenko next, which I don't think will be that hard for her. No offense to Serenko.
Rude.
Oh, come on. But I actually had a question for you. Can you explain because it involves two people that we've talked about before, Elena Ostapenko versus Helena Kalinina. Kalinina has actually had some very impressive wins this year, but I'm not quite sure how. Please explain.
Me either. Yeah, I mean, Kalinina is sort of similar, is occupying a slightly similar but different narrative space to a Haddad Maia in that she has strung together. Well, she's strung together some impressive results, but to what end? Like, what is the end game of this? And the end game would be a major result at a slam, and she hasn't really had that yet, or she hasn't really gotten that signature win. And so that's the question. She's another one with sort of an unorthodox game, who's got some momentum. Obviously has a tremendous amount of goodwill behind her, being Ukrainian. So all of that sort of lending itself to a rise in the rankings, but it's hard to really in serious conversation. I would certainly put Haddad Maia ahead of her right now, just based off of
100%.
Haddad Maia's winning streak, but still has not made the third round of a slam. Only won her first. It's made the second round twice in a row in Paris, and made the second round of the US Open quite a few years ago. So I think, a tricky player, a dangerous floater, someone that a top seed probably would not want to get when the draw comes out tomorrow, but it's hard to really predict Ostapenko's a much easier story. I mean, she's up and down. She won her last match in Doha when she won in 40 minutes against Garbine Muguruza, and then lost I don't know how many in a row between then and Paris, and is finally starting to seemingly pull things together with a little bit of an assist from the retirement of Madison Keys earlier.
Well, she won 6-3 in the first, and then Keys retired. I don't know why Keys retired. I don't know what Keys is doing, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, well, she got the grudge win on Isla Tomljanovic. She got that rematch. Evidently, there was something to write home about in that one. There wasn't the chaos that I would have hoped for in that one. But I mean,
Isla's pretty composed on court.
Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't going to be something that we expected it to be honest. Maybe if she was still dating Nick, that would happen, but we don't know.
No comment.
Is that a bad joke? Sorry. I hope I didn't offend anyone there.
But speaking of Ostapenko, I think that, if she wins this, if she defends this title in Eastbourne, then I think that,
she has a good
certainly
chance.
puts her in the conversation. She was certainly looking like a dark horse to win, or not win Wimbledon, maybe not win Wimbledon. Certainly go deep. I think we're looking for her to now. She's had some really impressive results in the last 12 months outside the slams, and now the question is, can she do it at a slam?
Well,
again, it's almost
at a slam.
Haddad Maia. Yeah, it's a little Haddad Maia-esque at this point. I mean, yes, she had a great run in the Middle East, but to what end if you're not doing it at a slam? It doesn't matter. It's the harsh reality of the game that we're covering.
Well, that's the hard thing that we're doing right now, right? It's just trying to figure out who we think is going to be the best player at a tournament without knowing anything in particular, right? And that's one thing.
Make it hard for me.
Well, it's shocking to me that we constantly try to make predictions in the sense where we know how they play. We know what they need to do. And then depending on the day, whether or not it goes well for them, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah. I mean, I think right now it's just, it's brutal right now to be watching the WTA. I mean, I think that there was a brief moment in Indian Wells in Miami where you kind of felt like things were coalescing. And since then we've seen
Nothing.
a good deal of backsliding. I mean, we're back to where we were in many ways in Australia, where it was Ash against the field, and now it's Iga against the field. It's really, and Iga's obviously, the only difference is that Iga's a much more dominant number one than Ash was. I mean, I think that's, so in some ways it's worse for the field.
A little bit.
You thought you were finally going to get your shot because the person who's been winning all the big titles retired. Just kidding. There's somebody else really ready to take her slot and be even better at it. So I think that's maybe in some ways that's deflating. It's tough because I think I'm used to a women's tour where everyone believes that they can win, and it feels like that's no longer the case. And I don't know why or what needs to be done to fix that.
It's just crazy to me how I didn't even realize how strong this draw was for Eastbourne. Like Badoza was the 1 seed, lost to Jody. Rybakina lost to Sorenko. Yeah, who did I see? Sakari lost to Kalinina. Somehow Putintseva lost to Kalinina as well. Ostapenko, Mertens, Georgie. Like the quarterfinals are Haddad Maya, Sorenko, Kvitova, Dart. Nice to see Dart actually playing well. Ostapenko, Kalinina, Georgie, and Tomova. Like, if I was to ask you to name one of these players and where they're from, I don't think anyone could.
It's part of what makes me think on both sides we could potentially see some very unexpected results, because we've seen them on the men's side in a couple of weeks, whether it's Ryan Peniston or Tim van, winning his title. I think
Tim van Rijtenhoven,
the Dutch guy, the Flying Dutchman.
There you go.
Between him and them and what we're seeing a bit on the women's side, I do think the Bad Homburg quarterfinals are a bit more impressive. We got Kasatkina, Andreescu, though Kasatkina won't be at Wimbledon. We've got Halep and Anisimova, Cornet, Kerber, Garcia, Lisicki for some of these throwbacks.
Lisicki versus Garcia.
It is her first grass court quarterfinal since 2013 Wimbledon, when she made the final, famously. If you want to talk about a run to the final, compare Lisicki to Goff's. I think that's what I was talking about earlier in the podcast in terms of a domineering run.
Tomorrow's going to be actually a really good match. And I'm turning on my alerts while I'm looking at this because it's Garcia, Lisicki, Kasatkina, Andreescu, Cornet, Kerber, and Halep, Anisimova. I actually don't think that's not a bad quarterfinal field.
No,
at all.
This is
the best one we've seen in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, this is an ideal slate where if any of these women win, you would think this makes sense. I mean, Garcia and Cornet would probably be the most surprising, but if Lisicki runs the table, wins, Kerber runs the table, wins, Anisimova, Halep, Kasatkina, Andreescu, you would feel like, wow, other than Kasatkina, the rest of them would suddenly really launch themselves into the Wimbledon conversation, because it's really anyone's. Except for it really is anyone's.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I mean. It's just, but it's nice to see Lisicki actually coming back to win and actually playing well. I think she's a little bit, everyone's kind of thrown her under the radar at this point in her career, but quarterfinal is a wild card and she could actually make the semis or finals.
Yeah. I mean, she's certainly someone who seemed quite far gone for a large
100%
portion of the last few years. I mean, I think, even before
last 3 years, she was, I thought she retired.
She hasn't made a Grand Slam quarterfinal since 2014. I mean, it's been total doldrums.
What was her career high?
12. I have her page open. I didn't just know.
Thank you. No, you're fine. I kind of figured since you have your hand on your keyboard right now.
Yeah.
Last thing before we hit bed. Serena Williams playing doubles. Obviously, it's her only warm-up tournament before she got the wild card to Wimbledon. Honestly, not surprised. I thought she wasn't playing Wimbledon for the longest time, even though she announced it. She announced it twice, I think. It was when she announced it with Aaron Rodgers on some video platform, which people didn't think was real. Yeah. And the article came out from ESPN or Bleacher Report saying that Venus and Serena were most likely not going to play. Then the morning before she got the wild card, she posted her shoes. And then an hour later, she received the wild card and accepted the wild card into playing Wimbledon. No
Yeah, I
shot
don't
she's
think.
winning this, right?
Well, I mean, talk about Andreescu believing she can beat all the players in front of her. I mean, I think Serena, times 23 has to feel like, this is a field right now where there is still opportunity for even her at her age, with her, at the stage of her career, she could still potentially win a slam. And I mean, this is someone who has won 5 and 6 matches at slams quite often in the last couple of years. She has not, brought it home and won the title, but she's come very close. And if anything, the field has gotten weaker, since she was doing that. So I think I didn't expect when she made that. I really wouldn't call what she did with Aaron Rodgers an announcement. It certainly seemed like a joke.
I don't know what that was. What would you call that?
I would call that a tease. I would call that sarcasm.
A publicity stunt.
It just seemed absurd. I mean, it just didn't seem like it was
grounded real
in any kind of reality. So I don't think anyone was really expecting to see her at Wimbledon. And, I think this is an ideal week for her, to have a easy sort of relaxing, easing back into tour life, gets to play with, now world famous on Jabeur in doubles. I mean, again, that exhibition tour, let's make that money, girls.
How surprised were you about that announcement? I had no idea that was coming. The fact that it was Jabeur too was shocking.
Yeah, you would think it would be a player that you would assume she knew about. I mean, because Jabeur has had all of her success when Serena has not been on tour. One often thinks of Serena as not being super plugged in to tour life when she's not participating. So you wonder how much she's been following or has seen on Jabeur, but certainly she's gotten quite an eyeful in these 2
or
matches.
Or at least someone told her about her, and then she went, "Yeah, we'll play." It's like, what?
Yeah, I would love to have been wherever that decision.
Can you imagine
that
conversation? Imagine if she wasn't following anything. It would be insane.
Quite a pitch to be like, no, this is the one you want. I mean, it's especially because it's not even like Jabeur is particularly known as a doubles player. I mean, you would think maybe someone who you think goes, won a few doubles titles, that would almost make more sense.
No, she wouldn't go with a doubles play. Can you imagine her playing with a primarily doubles player that has one double, a mix?
No.
Exactly.
No, it's not a primary doubles player. I mean, a singles player who has racked up some. I mean, even looking at this, I mean, we're right now, we're not really, there's not a ton of overlap between singles and doubles right now in the current field of singles players.
Oh, I'm still looking at the Humber
past
draw. Excuse me. We're in Eastbourne, right, for her?
Yeah, but I was just scrolling through the Wimbledon seeds, and there really aren't a ton of top players right now who have any kind of doubles resume to speak of, I guess, other than Muguruza. But that's,
can you imagine can you imagine if she played doubles with, and I'm looking at the doubles list and I'm just going through the players of who I think she could have played with besides Jabeur.
Mm-hmm.
If she played with Haddad Maya, would have been an interesting one, to say the least. Can you imagine those two forehands on opposite sides?
On opposite sides.
And then maybe Desiree from America, or even I don't even think she would come close to playing with Krejcikova, right? There's no way.
No, yeah, probably not. It's
so weird because you really don't know who she would have picked.
Maybe Shelby Rogers, if she had like some experience.
That's what I'm saying. Like someone from Billie Jean Cup. You idiot.
I'm sorry, Billie Jean King. I mean, what better way to revamp a team competition than to give it a longer name, and not even a name that, God bless Billie Jean King, but a name that doesn't even roll off the tongue. The BJK Cup, just not ideal.
If she played with Ostapenko, I would have called it quits. I would have laughed hysterically.
They did play an exhibition match before, so
that's what I'm saying.
They do have some connection, so it wasn't totally outside the realm of possibility. But I think it had to be. It had to be Ons. It's a weird one, but
sure.
I don't know. I would love to see where Serena ends up in the draw. I mean,
we're all, because it comes out tomorrow, correct? The time we're recording this, it comes out tomorrow. What time?
I think 10 a.m. Eastern time.
Okay. Well, I'll be waiting on the edge of my seat for that.
You'll be frantically editing this all night.
No, I'll be shit. I'll be on court for 8 hours tomorrow. So yep.
Hopefully these takes hold up.
Well, we'll see.
Well, most of these takes were I don't know. So
yeah, most of these takes were let's see where it goes.
Yeah.
David, it's always a pleasure having you on, especially when it's 10 o'clock at night. Well, now it's 11:15. So we've been doing this for about an hour. Yeah. It's perfect. David, any last thoughts going into Wimbledon before the draw comes out?
I just can't wait to see the draw. That's all I feel like these pre-draw previews always give me agita, especially on the women's side, even in the best of times, because you felt that, you know, you could talk up a player all you want, but she can end up with her nemesis in the second or third round. And that just sort of,
I'll probably have you on next week as well to just go through the draw itself, because it's just going to be a joke. I have a feeling it's just going to be, I don't know.
Yeah, I think a first or second round post-mortem of who is realistically capable of making the final out of their respective halves is probably good. I think even when the draw comes out, we still have to then see these women play a round or two to see how they're faring on the surface.
And we're still a week out, so it's really gonna be interesting.
Yeah.
But David, thank you so much for joining in. I really do appreciate it. Make sure to go follow David, the verified man, on Twitter at DK Tennis. And thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go to bed and pass out. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye, guys.
You didn't do the salute. There you go. All right. Thank you, guys.